and then, okay, we are on. First, go through what we heard today, any reactions to that, and then let's set at least 5 minutes aside for what we think our next steps are. And while there's silence, I'll say, from my perspective, it is this effort to establish the carbon intensity values, especially for our bioenergy aspects, that is the big piece. And I think the consultants are working on it, and I think they've heard our comments. But if we need to emphasize particular aspects that you haven't heard, then let's make sure. As has always been the case, wood is still my most sensitive topic. ANR has not, and I don't blame them by any stretch, but they are not, in terms of the life cycle work, looking at the impacts of harvesting wood. And I wish I had a solution. I guess the inventory in its last iteration had an appendix that addressed wood and assigned a kind of an equivalent to a carbon intensity value to wood. And I suppose that we can pose that to the consultants, and I know they're looking at it, but there hasn't been any other effort on that topic that I'm aware of. Floyd.
This is more of a threshold question to the group, and maybe it's just me and the meds kind of fogging up my thought process, but I was a little bit confused. I heard two things in terms of target setting. One is step change. I heard that, but then I also heard kind of linear.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to reconcile those two things. I mean, a step change to me is going from here to here, but linear is kind of a transition. So, I mean, which one is it? I couldn't quite figure out what the meaning was there.
I might be able to clarify. So the step change refers to the carbon intensity ceiling of creditable measures,
okay,
versus a linear trajectory for the declining sector emissions total. So they're interrelated because the carbon intensity will be the life cycle aspect, the credit aspect of a measure's value, but the RCI is not life cycle. It's really just based on fuel volumes. The way I see it, the step change that lags the relative reduction from 1990, because they do align in statute, the 2030 and the 2050 carbon intensity and emissions value relative to 1990 are the same. If you allow the carbon intensity of fuels to lag behind the sector reduction, you're just going to have to make up the difference somewhere else. So either more heat pumps have to go in, you have to pay for sequestration, even though as far as I know, sequestration is not contemplated in the measure list yet, but maybe if it becomes economic at some point in the near future, it could be, though it doesn't quite fit the definition. So special exceptions. But hopefully that clarifies the distinction between a step change for the carbon intensity of creditable fuels versus the sector emissions reduction rate.
So you think that the product of the PUC in terms of the carbon intensity limit for acceptable renewable fuels is a step function?
Yes.
Okay.
If you look at their proposal, that's how I interpret it.
Okay. Floyd, do you think that is what the discussion was?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I need to wrap my head around that. It would help if at some point we see an actual kind of, for illustrative purposes, kind of a table of CI targets, just to see how this translates into actual targets.
I have drafted that table, or actually it's a chart. I don't think I have a means to share that within this meeting right now.
Maybe you could send it around when you have it.
But yeah, I can definitely send that around.
Yeah,
it's just a rough estimate. So I may be missing one particular fudge factor. The the relative reductions that I plot are all relative to the most recent inventory RCI sector emissions. And I'm not sure if I have that relationship quite right because the emissions reductions are relative to 1990 emissions, but it's for illustrative purposes. I think it's clear enough.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Thank you, Matthew.
Any other topics that we heard today that we want to embellish? And again, my initial observation, do we think that the efforts that are being undertaken to establish carbon intensity values are they on track? Are they reflecting the discussions that we've had, or is there some additional effort we need to make to assure that some of our perspectives are being included?
So I see Rick has his hand up.
Hey, boss.
I wasn't going to, well, I was just going to say, you asked what other issues. I'm just going to repeat what I said in the main meeting. And that is that I'm very interested and mildly concerned about how marginal emissions are being calculated for the electric grid, and I'll just keep an eye on that, and we'll see where it gets us. I have no problem with rough justice in getting the numbers, but I do care a good deal about the conceptual or theoretical basis of what we're trying to achieve there, because I really do feel that the moment you bow to the grid, you constrain yourself to the regional grid, you fail to take into account everything we're trying to do through our policies, and also through just the purchase decisions that our utilities make, and it violates, in my estimation, the correct way to calculate marginal anything. So that's just a longer thing.
But Rick, I just want to make sure that I'm not sure this group, by our definition, is supposed to be. But yeah, so you got to stay on top of that. And I know I personally will support you, but yeah.
So yeah, I knew it wasn't really, but I thought I'd just mention it. Sorry.
Not a question, but I'm happy to see that looks like we're settling on GREET as the Lifecycle accounting tool. I know there was a lot of debate about that, and I apologize if that was settled in the last meeting that I missed, but I'm happy to see that we're moving on from, do we use GREET or not GREET? And then, I think we can make progress from this point forward.
Yeah, I don't think there was an alternative really that rose. Well, let's take some time. Matthew, I know you sent. I see you sent that. You attached that. That's great.
Yeah, I sent a couple of simple plots for how I interpreted the proposal, and then on feedback for how emissions are being characterized so far. The things that I noted that I didn't hear were like that last mile component. So it's like from generator to outlet, from distributor of fuel to combustion at the end use customer site, because that's what measures are. They're at end use customer. So those emissions definitely have to be estimated.
And did we hear, though, Opinion Dynamics also recognizes that? That's what I heard.
They did. So I heard it mentioned once that they were going to look at it, but look at it isn't, actually attempt to estimate it.
Yeah, we'll keep their feet to the fire.
And then, biogenics is a hot topic and it keeps coming up. There was a comment in the chat that I tried to address, basically saying, GREET, yes, life cycle according to fuel pathways language in the act does have to include combustion emission for biogenics. So it's not treated as zero for life cycle purposes. That value is either deemed or measured. So there's maybe some policy flexibility there for whether or not it's an absolute molecule per molecule combustion accounting, or if some sort of sequestration cycle is averaged into biogenic fuels, but also that it deals with the methane crediting in that it's inclusive. So methane crediting will be included for biogenics. And
Does that
then,
mean you get negative carbon intensity values?
then again, we come into deemed and measured. So I think that's potentially a policy flexibility position.
Yeah.
And then the last note that I had was, since they're saying upstream is essentially the production emissions associated with renewable generators like solar panels and wind turbines, since weatherization is going to be such a significant, or presumably is going to be such a significant portion of measures, and has no emissions according to the inventory, because we've only got one insulation manufacturer in Vermont, and I think their volume is so small that they wouldn't show up in RCI. Some form of the emissions from production of petroleum-based insulation materials does need to be accounted for apples to apples.
Okay, but Matthew, I think that discussion has been raised and they did not take that. It was only the cycle of fuels, combustion of fuels. Because I think that has been raised in earlier meetings and they said they would not look at
Right.
the life cycle emissions
So I believe
related
that's
to
actually, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. Anyway, okay, yeah, but that's what I've heard in the past. They're not going
Right.
to do it.
I
So
believe, I don't know if Opinion Dynamics made that assertion. The department's contractor did make that statement, but I think since they're contracted with us, we have, the ability to adjust that position.
okay,
But to me, it's sort of even playing field for all technologies. We're not going to discriminate unless the act makes us. So if the data is available, it should
so
be
can you keep us
accounted for.
posted to the extent you're successful with NV5? Please keep us posted and we never know exactly how NV5 is communicating with Opinion Dynamics. So yeah, just ask, keep us posted on that because
I certainly will.
I've been under the presumption that they're not going to do it.
Right. And I may be overridden by the department at large, but that's my personal position.
Okay. Patrick.
I think I just have a process question touching on what you just said there, Ken, which is there's so many questions, so many different people working on different things that are all relevant to this bioenergy group. It may be just me, but I'm having trouble keeping track of which is which. And I think maybe a next which is which, who's handling what, how, what decisions have been made, how which consultant is doing X, Y, and Z or isn't. And my concern is that with all that uncertainty, that if the consultants go and do their work and then come back without having made a choice, it's not in budget to do it again. So I think
so can I ask for you to send me a list?
A suggestion for a next step is that we try to summarize all of who's doing what, when, where, why, and how.
Can you start with a list?
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be great. And everybody else and I think it's appropriate to send it to me. And then I'll compile and do that. And I'll do it too. And I'll send it around. Sam.
Thanks, Ken. Sorry, I'm off video here. Kept booting me from Zoom, so I think I have some sort of internet problem. Just quick follow-up question for Matthew. First, thanks. It's really helpful to hear, your interpretation of the statute. I think there's been a lot of interpretation of the statute, and I don't necessarily have a strong opinion on that because I wasn't there when it was developed. So just really helpful to hear that from you. Clarification on the biogenic piece. So you're saying that in your view, the statute says to include biogenic at the point of combustion, but that there could be upstream netting in GREET, or maybe not GREET, whatever model we decide to use.
Yes, that's my understanding. I believe that's how the methane component would be dealt with.
Okay, but so the methane component or that applies to all biofuels, right?
Yeah, any sequestration or avoided emissions counterfactuals, I believe, are specified in that particular section of the act, which I can repaste into the chat once I find it again.
No worries, I have it here. Unless other folks need it, but on the other than any methane crediting on the biogenic CO2 piece, do you interpret that as we report biogenic the same as fossil, but then we could do netting upstream to change the overall CI score? Or I'm just trying to figure out like what you meant there, because it's helpful to know.
Yes, so that section also includes lost sequestration. Let me find it again. So I would assume that
We're
that
gonna get,
accounting
we're
would
gonna
be
get
done in the
booted
upstream
off.
part.
And
Yep.
but I think this question is a critical one that we need to frame, because I also agree, it's not clear, the A&R work, and it's not clear that how the biogenic emissions and whether we're going to be starting with the combustion point, that is not clear to me. And that's hugely important for all the bioenergy sources.
Thanks again, Matthew. Thanks, Ken.
Yeah, so you are
I'll
going
just say that's my interpretation.
I'm
Not the
gonna leave
departments
and
or the
let the
commissions.
I'm gonna
Okay.
let the other group know that we're ending and going back, and then you can wrap us up. So
Yeah.
I'll give you one more minute.
Okay, thanks. But again, I think the specific is for us to list off all the topics that we're kind of aware of, to try to get a status of who's doing